Hey now everybody, welcome back to our movie review podcast. Welcome back to Cinemacast right here on our YouTube channel and on Rumble. Hit that like, hit that follow, hit that subscribe down below if you enjoy our podcast and our other content on these channels. If you guys want to follow us on social media, our streaming channels and such, and also if you like to donate to the channel, links are all down below. So let's take a look at this 2025 American slasher film directed by Eli Craig, based off the novel Clown in a Cornfield, which came out just 5 to 6 years prior to this, or I think a little bit more, longer than that. Yes, this is Clown in a Cornfield. I say that very, very loosely. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, when I heard about the book, okay, it came out in 2020. It's a horror novel, and it is written by Adam Cesare. Adam Cesare. I want to say Cesare. He's an American author. And this was his first novel in the young adult genre. Yes. This is not an adult-rated movie or book. It is not a Stephen King novel. It's not Clive Barker. You would think Clown in a Cornfield. Now, it does kind of sound corny when you see the name Clown in a Cornfield. That's almost as bad as like the cult classic Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which they were killer, but they were like very ridiculous looking, of course. This movie won the book won the 2020 Bram Stoker Award for Best Young Adult Novel. And of course, 5 years later, the movie released. Now, mind you guys, if you haven't paid attention to our podcast, there will be some spoilers alerts, so if you guys do not want to hear much about the movie, if you don't want any spoilers, cut the review short now, go watch the movie, and then come back. Now, I'm trying to remember a whole lot about this movie, and it is very... how do I put it? And I've done a review on another movie probably about a season or two back where I said that the plot or the climax was going to be, or the outcome of the movie was going to be not just a big twist, but predictable. And I will say with this movie, and I have never read the book. I honestly never read the book. I have seen the book. I've actually met the author, Adam, at a Fright Reads event late last year, I think it was. It was back in September or October. I have the video up on my YouTube channel if you guys want to check that out. It was a Fright Reads event. So I met so many aspiring young authors, so many new books that it came out. And of course, one of them was the 2020 Clown in the Cornfield, and that's when I heard that they were making it into a movie. They were adapting it into a movie. I was like, okay, I'll just wait for the movie to come out, you know. But then when it comes to movies that are based off of or adapted from novels, they tend to not have all the context from the story in the movie as they would in the book. Look at Stephen King movies that are based off the novels. They don't include a whole lot of context out of the books that they should. And some of those movies are, you know, they're very big disappointments of Stephen King. He doesn't enjoy that his movies that are turned into, or his books that are turned into movies that don't really follow the story suit, you know, and he gets upset, you know, his panties up in a bunch kind of thing, you know. But there are people that do find a love and joy for Stephen King movies, you know, movies like The Shining or Christine or Pet Sematary, you know. I mean, something maybe not all there from the novel, but still finds a true love somewhere. And I think that's probably where this movie falls into place. Even though I didn't read the novel, but if you read the novel, I don't know if you're going to go into this movie expecting something that you've read, or if you've already seen it, then you're probably like, that was amazing, or that was or maybe it was spot on. I don't know. They said the film received generally positive reviews from critics. So let's go ahead and get into the plot just a little bit. And there is a time gap with this movie at the beginning, of course. And the start of it takes place in 1991, the town of Kettle Springs, Missouri, where a group of teenagers party near an old Bay Pen corn syrup factory. And of course, two teenagers sneak off in a nearby cornfield, and they're killed off by Bay Pen's mascot, Friendo. No, it's not Friendo. It's not that. It's Friendo. Friendo. Now, when you hear the name Friendo, already you cannot take this movie seriously. You can't take this movie seriously at all. In fact, even though the Wikipedia page for this movie says it's an American slasher film, it's a slasher horror comedy. So yes, it's one of those movies that it does have some comedic value to it. And it tries to be more of a horror movie, but it doesn't take itself too seriously at certain points in time. And of course, in present day, you got this girl, Quinn Maybrook, and she is played by Katie Douglas. Now, I will say, this might be a different, okay. So Katie Quinbrook, I don't recognize any of the main movies that she starred in. She is a very young actress. She's 26 years old. And then you got her father, who's played by Aaron Abrams, Dr. Glenn Maybrook. Now, Aaron Abrams, I thought I seen in a movie or two within the last 20-25 years. I'm looking through. Okay, so he was in the movie Resident Evil Apocalypse, but he was an assistant in that movie. I'm like, okay, I did see that movie, but I don't remember seeing him in there. But then I'm looking through, I'm like, okay, a lot of these movies don't even recognize. Even TV shows that he may have been on don't recognize, so yeah, it's one of those things. But there is one particular actor in here that I do recognize, and that is actor Kevin Durant. 51-year-old Kevin Durant. I recognize him. He was in a lot of movies that I've seen. He was in Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. I watched that. He was in Walking Tall. I've seen him in there. I think, did I see Smoking Ace? No, I did not see Smoking. I've seen Wild Hogs with John Travolta. He was the Blob in X-Men Origins, Wolverine. He was in Resident Evil Retribution. I've seen him in that. So there was a few films I've seen. Even in, I think I did a review for season 2 of Abigail. He was in the movie Abigail. So yeah, that is one well-known actor that I do know that I did see in there. Everybody else is just pretty much, yeah, I don't even know who they are. So there's only like one well-known actor. So in the present day, following the plot, you got Quinn and her father. They relocate to Kettle Springs, where Glenn is a new town doctor. Their relationship is fractured following the death of Quinn's mother. Following a detention on her first class, and I think it's like her first day of school, she befriends several of the teenagers in there. And one of the teenagers' name is Cole Hill, who ends up showing Quinn the horror parody videos that they create for the YouTube channel. So yes, in this movie, there is a big nod to YouTube, which is ironic because you guys are watching this review here on YouTube. So yeah, there's a group of teenagers in the movie. They have a YouTube channel where they create these videos and such, which all surround the psychotic Friendo throughout Kettle Springs. They end up faking deaths for the videos, for content, and it's all spectacular. They got some special effects in there, you know, that are pretty standard, you know, like not CG but practical effects. And that's one thing that I like about a good horror movie is if they use practical effects, you know, instead of high-tech special effects, you know, like CGI, of course, you know, like I would rather see somebody get killed on screen and have it look realistic than to have it look very CG where it's like quick and you could definitely tell it's like really fake. So yeah, practical effects. I'm a big fan of movies with practical effects, especially for horror movies. So yeah, after all this bonding, they do take a trip out to this farm by the cornfield, you know, and this was after, well, let's see, let's not jump too much ahead. So at one point, there's a 100th Founders Day Town Festival, and an accident on Matt's end ensued. Matt is one of the friends, of course, who ended up causing a float to be fully engulfed in fire and ultimately ruining the festivities. Now, one thing about the teenagers in this movie, they always get the blame for something, especially one teen in particular, which is Cole, who takes a liking to Quinn, or Quinn takes a liking to him throughout the movie. So you got the sheriff in the movie who is not very particular about the kids. The kids get a lot of hate from the townspeople and such. And then there's a big party going on one night where they go to the farmhouse, an isolated farmhouse. And then, of course, you know, where they think that they are safe. You know, they think that somebody's filming a video for YouTube, and it turns out there is a clown in the cornfield that comes out and begins to attack the kids with a crossbow and such. And then you got all these other people that are there for this party. They all lock themselves inside the barn, leaving this group of kids outside. But aside from all that, each kid starts dying off one by one. Even that leads up to the point of the big party at the barn. So yeah, there is a bit going on, and I know I'm getting a little bit all over the place with this movie, but I will get down to the nitty-gritty instead of talking about the entire movie and such. So this movie almost kind of feels like, to me, a parody of movies that I have seen in the past. Movies like Thanksgiving, which came out 2 years prior, which was a movie that was sort of in the making. Well, not really in the making for about 20 years, just about, from Eli Roth, but they finally made it into a movie. But this movie, going into it, it is an R-rated movie, of course. I mean, I would think it's an R-rated movie, you know, with the violent content that's in it and all. But this is a movie that feels like it has been done other times in other movies, especially with the comedic value to it, you know, and such, and at the rate that certain victims are killed off in the movie, of course. And there is a plot that goes along with it. The plot is very interesting, but at times it doesn't make a whole lot of sense until you get to a certain point where it turns out there's not just one clown involved, there are multiple clowns involved. And no, they are not extraterrestrial beings or not paranormal beings. These are sick fucks dressed in clown attire, dressed as this clown named Friendo, and they all wield different weapons. So there's a vast majority of these clowns chasing this group of kids throughout a cornfield and into town and such. And it gets ridiculous. Like, this is the movie that kind of has you on the edge of your seat a little bit with a lot of the chases and a lot of the different scenes, especially, you know, when some of the kids end up dead or somebody gets abducted or whatever. And like I said earlier on, this movie is very predictable with its plot, and the twist comes toward the end if you haven't already guessed it, but I guessed it a little bit before because of how some of these clowns come off across some of the characters in the movie. And it turns out the clowns are all the adults in the town. That is the biggest twist for everybody, and I saw it coming a mile away when I first sniffed it, when I first saw it, just like minutes before the big reveal, and I was like, yes, I knew it. The adults, some of the adults that you see in town, especially the sheriff, who ends up being the killer clowns, but they do get off, they do get killed off by the teenagers, of course, in certain grotesque ways. Not very, very graphic, but in certain grotesque ways. And there's a reason why. And it's something that happens on an anniversary of every 30 years, they say. And like they said, the first incident was in 1931, then 1961, then 1991, and why they skip ahead and not 2021 but 2025, I guess, I have no idea, but it's the 100th anniversary of the town's founding. So yeah, this movie does end not really on a cliffhanger, but it does end with a charm of, okay, it's 1 year later after the events of the end of this movie, where Glenn is running for mayor, the father, and Quinn is leaving for college. And of course, the one thing that pops up throughout the movie, which is like a little symbol for the clowns, like when you play it and one of them's there, and it's a music box. It's a clown music box. You spin the little spindle and the clown pops up, and then boom, somebody's there. She ends up throwing it out the window, and boom, that's the end of the movie right there. So yeah, there is a lot going on in this movie with the plot, but not a whole lot. For a movie that's 96 minutes, and a lot of good horror movies, a lot of decent horror movies, they're usually around, the 90-minute mark, and they usually make that mark pretty well, where it doesn't bore you too much, it keeps you on the edge of your seat, it keeps you entertained for so long. Now, looking into the critical responses for this movie, Rotten Tomatoes gave this movie a 74% out of 117 critics' reviews that are positive. The website's consensus reads that Clown in the Cornfield doesn't reinvent the core maze, but its clever insights, subversion of expectations, and solid foundation slashes its way to the top. And then you got, let's see, Brian of RogerEbert.com, and of course, Roger Ebert is like the liberal of movie critics, basically. Gave the movie a 2.5 out of 4 stars, saying that he found Craig's film much more interesting when it was just allowed to be chaotic instead of when it was explaining the chaos. Megan Navarro of BloodyDisgusting.com gave the film a 3 out of 5, saying Tucker and Dale vs. Evil director Eli Craig tackles the mostly faithful adaptation with aplomb, bringing the right balance of gore and comedy for a zippy, lean slasher. However, Owen of Variety gave the film a negative review and wrote, the film, in its trivial way, exudes a dyspeptic downer vibe, the result of everyone in it being so testy and unpleasant. So yeah, there's a lot going on with the reviews, with the critics feeling different ways about this film. But like I said, this movie, it feels like it has a hint of a lot of different slashers and horror movies in it that you may have already seen. It's just, you got a story about a clown, that is said to be, killed off people every 30 years or so, and they're killing off teenagers. They're killing off teenagers. It's like the reverse of Children of the Corn. If you remember, Children of the Corn came out, 31 years ago, I think it was, was it 40 years ago? I can't remember. It's like 41 years ago or something like that. It was over 40 years ago. God, man, over 40 years for Children of the Corn. Come on. A movie like that starring Linda Hamilton and such, where they take a trip into town and all the adults are killed off by the kids who are hypnotized and possessed by he who walks behind the rose. And now it's like almost a complete reverse with this. It's now the adults in town who are secretly the clowns during this festival, killing off teenagers. So it's like a parody. I would probably say that this movie almost kind of feels like a parody of Children of the Corn mixed with a few other different horror movies. Now, the director Eli Craig is mentioned that he did Tucker and Dale, versus Evil. So that was his debut direction and writer for that movie. That was back in 2010. Then he did a movie called Little Evil, which was an American supernatural horror comedy film. I never saw that. And of course, the next one was Clown in the Cornfield. So Eli Craig only directed and wrote 3 major films. He had a short film that he directed and wrote back in 2004, probably when he was quite young and in college or such. He did do writer's notes for a couple of TV shows. And he did act in some movies. He was acting in, he was in The Rage Carrie 2. He was in Space Cowboys with Clint Eastwood. He was a cameraman in Tucker and Dale versus Evil, and he was somebody in Little Evil. So he had some acting debuts in a few films, but not a whole lot on his plate. And he tackled this story, he tackled this book. And I want to say, even though I never read the novel, I'm not familiar with the novel but now that I've watched the movie, I can say, okay, this was a pretty decent, I guess, an adaptation from a novel that was geared toward teenagers. It is a teenager or a young adult or teen adult novel, I guess is what they called it. So yeah, this movie being graphic in the way it is an R-rated film, based off a book that's geared toward teenagers. But then again, you got some Fear Street movies that are based off of R.L. Stine novels that are on Netflix, and they are very violent and grotesque. So I guess anything can happen, when it's death to a teenager. I mean, everybody likes a good slasher horror movie where it's teenagers that are involved and they're getting killed off one by one. So I guess it'd be a little too bland and boring for adults to be killed off. So why not just make it teenagers? And then of course you got movies out there, especially Stephen King movies, where kids are victims now. Kids are victims. Like even in Stephen King's It, the remake for It, like just watching how some of the kids are being killed off, it's like, god damn, nobody's safe, not even kids. So it's like, what's more terrorizing to watch in a horror movie? When a child is in danger, or maybe when a teenager's in danger and they act so stupid. That's what we're here for. We're not here for some adult who's like 40 or 50 years old being chased by a serial killer in a fucking clown suit, through a cornfield. So, mind you, what do I think about this movie? I do think it's definitely worth a watch. You have to go into this with a very open mind and low expectations if you haven't heard of the novel. Or even if you look at it and you're like, it looks interesting. It looks like something that may be a Netflix movie and such, but no, it was released in theaters. And it was released on $1 million budget and only made $3.9 million so far. The movie did come out a couple months ago, I think. Yeah, it opened up at SXSW March 10th, and then it came out in the United States May 9th. So it hasn't been in theaters too long, but give it some time, and I'm pretty sure it will strive on streaming platforms when it hits, either Peacock, Netflix, Hulu, whoever grabs it first, I guess. But I will say, minus the acting in the movie, just the actors, I feel like everybody's a throwaway character with the exception of maybe one or two. I feel like everybody's a throwaway character, and they are very, very tongue-in-cheek and cheesy when it comes to the acting, when it comes to the written script for these characters. I feel like I'm watching a very, very shitty long episode of Goosebumps or something, basically. Like an R-rated Goosebumps. But I even think the acting in Goosebumps is a lot more perfected than it is in this movie. So yeah, this movie has a lot of different characters in it that you love to hate or you wish that would die off. It's just one of those movies that you get into, you're hoping somebody dies off, you hope something happens to them, that kind of thing. But other than that, I did find this movie quite enjoyable, especially certain scenes where, yes, you would be on the edge of your seat for it, see what happens next, or see who kills off who or what, in the next part. So I would give it a good rating of at least, I will be courteous to give Clown in the Cornfield a 7 out of 10 on today's rating for today's episode. A 7 out of 10. Does it hit its mark for a lot of people? Probably not. It is kind of enjoyable, even though it does have its little quirks in it, and it does have a very interesting plot to it, a very interesting twist to it, but it is very predictable from a certain point in the movie before you even find out, oh my god, it was them, So yeah, this movie, it does try to borrow elements from a lot of other different movies, and it turns it into something else. It brings it to the novel, it brings it to the screen, and yeah, I think it's just executed like a very, very shitty 80s horror slasher, kind of like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, especially the way the movie opens up as well. So you might have fun with this movie, you might not, but like I said, it's something that's worth going into at least one time. That way you can make your mind up for it, whether you like it or whether you hate it. So yeah, today's feature, Clown in the Cornfield, gets a 7 out of 10. And that does it for today's episode of Cinemacast, you guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for listening. If you guys made it all the way to the end, if you enjoy our content on the channel, please leave a like and subscribe down below. If you guys want to check us out on our stream platforms, on our social medias and such, all the links for everything are down below in the description section. Thank you for joining today for today's feature, Clown in the Cornfield, guys. Until next time, I'll catch you right back here at the cinema.